Hi, welcome back to Stress Relief Simplified. We're excited to share with you another new expert today. Hope you're enjoying this as much as we are. I'm Dannette, here with my partner Michael, and he's going to introduce the next expert.
All right, welcome back everybody to the summit. I have another exciting thought leader for you. IRENE LYON, MSc, is a nervous system specialist who helps people release their deepest traumas from their nervous systems, allowing them to finally heal from chronic mental, physical, and emotional conditions they've tried everything to fix. IRENE has intensively studied and practiced the work of Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais and Peter Levine, founder of Somatic Experiencing. She has a master's degree in research in the fields of biomedical and health science. IRENE, welcome to the summit.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. Good to see ya.
Yeah, you too.
And everyone else watching too.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. We're having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Let's dig right into this. So,
Let's do
what does it mean to be a nervous system specialist? And how did the nervous system become your specialty?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's really, in many ways, it's something I made up. Mainly because I'm not a trained psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a physical therapist. So I don't have like a one-bodied governing thing that governs what I do. I've studied, as you mentioned, the work of Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais, which is the Feldenkrais method, which is really hard to explain, but it's a very sophisticated form of mind, body, environmental awareness, movement method that kind of works from all spectrums, working with severe stroke all the way to performance, musical performance, athletic performance, and then all the in-betweens like back pain and chronic tightness and that kind of thing. So I studied that in my, mid-20s-ish, and then got into the work of Dr. Peter Levine shortly after that, which I can tell you about why I did, in 2008. And both of those modalities really blend working at this level of the nervous system, the sensory nervous system, how we improve our motor function, how we rewire the bad stuff that we've got, in our bodies due to stress and trauma and just bad habits. And I realized sort of a few years ago, what I'm really always working with is the nervous system. And at the time when I decided to sort of coin that term for myself, at least, it was kind of like, what? Like, you're a what specialist? And I actually had a lot of people say, you can't call yourself that. I'm like, well, there's a lot of people that are gut specialists and mind specialists. So I'm a nervous system specialist. So that's kind of how that evolved, I guess you could say.
I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. It's very creative, very entrepreneurial, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of like, what do you work with? I work with the nervous system.
Yeah.
So, that's how I got into that. And what I really started to realize too when I got into my work was post-Feldenkrais, I realized that there were sort of the missing pieces to the nervous system picture. I was really focused on the functional, the movement perspective. I know a lot of people know yoga and dance and Nia and those sorts of things. And Dr. Feldenkrais was really focused on a higher level of nervous system health. And I realized that we were missing kind of the lower level autonomic nervous system, which is what Peter Levine really focuses on in his work. And then they just were this really perfect kind of match made in heaven to help people at all these different levels.
That's great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great. And that's why you either discovered Dr. Peter Levine or sought him out.
I did. Yeah, it's an interesting story, actually. So I studied the Feldenkrais work 2004 to 07. I got into the work because of my own physical injuries. I was a ski racer back in my early 20s and late teens, and I kept injuring my knees and getting surgeries, and had one year where I had about 5 knee surgeries actually due to some complications. And when I was recovering and rehabilitating, everything I had learned in university because I studied exercise science and physical rehabilitation. It wasn't working. And that's how I got into Feldenkrais work. And it was, for lack of a better way of saying it, the only thing that helped. And so when something helps, you kind of are like, well, I better study this. So I did, and I loved it, and I got really good training, and I was practicing Feldenkrais in 2008, 2007, that kind of time frame. But there was a subset of people that I was working with who weren't getting better with the Feldenkrais work, who weren't getting better with physical therapy and occupational therapy and yoga and meditation and all the things that were really starting to bubble up as hot things to follow. And I, honest to God, don't remember how I came across Peter's work, but someone said, you should check out this stuff. Like, okay. And it was kind of how I got into the Feldenkrais work, and I did. And I don't know if it was a book that I read of his, or I went to the training site and I was like, I got to study this. So that was the '08, and I literally started my somatic experiencing training in Carlsbad, California, with one of his proteges, Steve Hoskinson, and just went full steam ahead into that work. And then it was really that work that made me see the human system, the human organism, how we trap stress, how we trap past trauma, and how it essentially dysregulates our nervous system and then causes all the problems that we see in our clients and in really the world. And it was kind of like this, oh my goodness, like this is it. And it isn't to say that I still don't practice Feldenkrais, but what I've seen is that most people can't enter into a practice like Feldenkrais right off the street because they have so much stored stress that they can't even be in their body without either freaking out or shutting down. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
It really does.
So yeah, that's how I got into Peter's work. And then I will add one more. I started studying his work, and he's really the pioneer in trauma healing at the somatic level. And then I started studying another branch of his work, which is one of his faculty members by the name of Kathy Kane. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of her, but she's senior faculty in the SE somatic experiencing model, and she's branched off and also does her own work called somatic practice. And her work opened up another layer of stress learning, and really learning about not just stress that we keep in our body, like from living as adults, but the inability for humans to deal with stress because they never learned how to deal with stress when they were infants. And that is a big part of what, as we've learned, causes chronic illness later in life. I'm not sure if anyone's talked about the ACE study on your
Not specifically, and I would love for you to talk about it, but we have talked that there tends to be a predisposition, a relationship between childhood trauma and adult illness. So please talk about the ACE test, because I think it's fascinating.
Sure, if we can go down that rabbit hole. So yeah, and there's so much information where you can learn about this, but in a nutshell, the ACE study stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And it was actually a study that happened by accident. So there was some researchers just down the road from you guys at La Jolla University were studying weight loss and people that were quite obese, like morbidly obese, and they were having beautiful success with lifestyle and diet and exercise and counseling and group support and kind of your general way that you would lose weight. And people were dropping weight, doing really well, but then the researcher, his name is Vincent Felitti, he realized that there was a subset of people that were just dropping out of the study. So even though they were losing hundreds of pounds, they just disappeared. And so he tracked these people down eventually over time and questioned them, as any good researcher would, like what's going on with these certain people. And what he started to figure out was that the people that dropped out often gained back the weight. And it was because they had various adverse experiences growing up that were so imprinted in their, not just their psyche, but their physiology, that it wasn't about the lifestyle. It wasn't about eating better and exercising. It was deep embedded in their nervous system, was this essentially fear, like real biological fear, shut down. So there's fight, flight, freeze, shut down. And they kind of were living in this toxic, dysregulated soup of a body that eventually what they did, and, again, I'm really simplifying this, but when they started to study all these individuals, and this is like tens of thousands of people they studied in this study, this is like big study, they saw this clear connection with early adversity and chronic illness later in life.
Mm.
And what's happening is that when a little one is growing up in a toxic environment and their body is literally in this stress response, danger, everything's dangerous, I'm going to die, is like the signal that's being played in their physiology, the system can't hang on to that level of stress. So it just shuts down. And this creates what we would call a very frozen physiology. And mammals, so us humans, we need lots of oxygen to survive. We need a lot of good blood flowing through our body. We need activity. We need connection. And when we don't have that, all kind of systems that are connected to the autonomic nervous system, like the digestive system, the hormonal system, the reproductive system, the vascular system, the immune system, they're connected to that autonomic nervous system. So if that nervous system is like kind of on the fritz or just shut down, those systems are literally not working in the way that they're supposed to be. There's just no flow. And some people are lucky in that they can get to their 40s or 50s and they can kind of scrape by with okay health. And then what often happens, as we've seen in the somatic experiencing fields, is that they'll have an event like a car accident or death of a loved one or a pet, or they lose their job or something like that. They lose their house. And it's just like the straw that broke the camel's back, if that makes sense. And all the dysregulation that had been sitting in their system since they were maybe born under the age of 5 kind of pops out. And then they get chronic illnesses, they end up on disability. So there's like a long story there, but essentially the ACE study really showed us in our field of work in somatic experiencing and in the work of Kathy Kane that this is what's happening with a lot of us adults that are unwell, is we can trace it back to like what happened in that pediatric phase of life. So yeah, it's kind of it's sad and it's interesting, and it's also a little kind of angers me sometimes because a lot of that stuff could be prevented, but just because of just the way things are, there's this exposure, and then we don't know about it until it's sometimes gone so far that a person ends up with chronic illness, chronic anxiety, depression, etc.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That is fascinating information.
It's a fascinating study, and I think what's interesting about it is that we've known about this research since the 90s. It's not a new study, and yet, and Gabor Mate, who we were talking about before we started recording, he talks about this. He's like, we know what causes these problems, and yet the way to change them isn't just individual, it's societal, it's political, it's educational, it's in the healthcare system. And the practitioners have to be willing to look at their own childhood stuff in order to help people at this level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, as it relates to the nervous system, so what do we need to know about the nervous system as it relates to stress?
Yeah. Where do we start? Well, I think one of the key things, if we just talk about even like from this moment forward, right? Because we don't want to get into how to treat all the little mini traumas and big traumas, but from this day forward, like if someone's watching this and they want to be less stressed or they want to store less stress, is we have to really understand what stress is, how it impacts the nervous system. So I'm simplifying, but essentially when there's a stressor, we go into, if it's let's say a stressor that's toxic or not good versus like, this is a positive stress, us talking, right? We're kind of on the spot, but we can manage, we can connect, that kind of thing. So that's a different kind of stressor. But this, I'm talking about a toxic stress, a really bad stress. We want to first be able to know that our body is going into a stress state. So that fight, right? Flee, like leave the building, like I can't handle this. And then when the system can't handle the fight flight because it's too much, the next stage is that shutdown, that freeze response. If we take it one step further, some people will then call shutdown and then kind of this collapse, which is indicative of, say, depression and that kind of like disengagement. So learning about what those things are, in the work I've done, even though a lot of folks will say don't confuse people with the theory, I have found in the thousands of people I've worked with online, the more they understand the intricacies of what fight and flight and freeze is, and then the different branches of freeze, which has to do with how our vagus nerve works and all of that, which is another topic. That's another summit. If we can really understand at a deep level what is happening in our stress chemistry, how our adrenaline goes on alert, how our cortisol goes on alert, even just understanding the theoretical aspects, from what I've seen, a human being, if they're interested, this is key, they're interested, can't help but start to change their physiology. Because they'll be like, they'll learn it, like maybe someone who's just watching this right now will be somewhere tomorrow or later, I hope they aren't, but somewhere where there's a stressor. Maybe they almost, avoid hitting a car or something, right? And they're safe, but they're feeling like this shakiness and this rush, and they feel flushed, and if they know, oh, this is my system preparing to fight and flee, they then have kind of a portal into, now I have to just pause, pull over, maybe get out, walk around, let that come down, as opposed to what's so common in our culture, pushing through it, right? Being then distracted. And this is what happens is in that situation, like avoiding a car accident, a person will keep driving, and because they have to drive, they start to shut off. They shut off the stress response. They try to breathe it away. They maybe turn on the radio, they call a friend, which is actually a good way to relieve stress. That's a good one to do. But then they won't realize that they've got this stored up intensity, fight, flight energy that they've built up. What happens if we take that further, let's say they never process it, they never get home and just feel, is they are then more likely to be disoriented because they're trapped in that fight flight. And we've seen this in a lot of Peter's work, is they're then more susceptible to getting into another accident because they're not oriented to the here and now. They're trapped in that old stress physiology, near miss of the accident, for example. So first thing I've always say to folks is you got to understand the theory. Back in like hunter-gatherer day, it wouldn't make a difference because everyone was just living by the moment and there wasn't all these distractions. There was no need to, keep driving to miss rush hour kind of thing. And so we didn't need that theory, but from what I've really seen in my studies is that with an intellectual population like ourselves, we need to make understanding of what's going on to then work on it.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we are a research-based society. We like the evidence. We like the research backed up what we might have known, even without it. So yeah, it makes complete sense.
Yeah. And I even, a little side story. I was at a conference maybe 3 years ago down in San Diego, actually, and met some other people that they called it nervous system work. They worked at the stress response level, and I got all excited. I'm like, oh, well, are you teaching your students the differences between the dorsal and the ventral branches of the parasympathetic and how the vagus nerve connects to this? And the person kind of dismissed what I was saying, and, oh, yeah, I understand that. And I'm like, do you really? And then they said, well, we don't feel it's important for our clients to understand any of that. They just want results. And it kind of made me sad. I was like, that sucks that you don't want to empower your students to understand what's actually going on. So, I kind of got up and left the table and sat somewhere else. But it kind of let me go, wow, there are a lot of people that aren't interested in teaching that depth. And I think that's sort of one of the things I've been very diligent at, is teaching the people that find me, like, not dumbing it down. Right. And giving people the benefit of the doubt. It's like, yeah, here's it. Let's teach you as much as we can, so that when you're in that situation that isn't textbook, right, you can actually tune in and go, oh, the reason I'm not shaking after that near miss on the highway is because I've just gone into shutdown. That's why I can't feel my legs right now. Right. Whereas someone might be like, oh my God, I can't feel my legs. What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
But if they understand how the physiology works under stress, they can then listen to it and go, okay, I really need to pull over now. This isn't safe.
Yeah.
So
real quick, before we go to the next topic, this isn't part of the summit, but you mentioned the vagus nerve. Can you just quickly describe what that is? I'm sure there's some people going, what is that?
The vagus nerve does not live in Vegas. So the vagus nerve really got popularized. I have to give credit to Stephen Porges. He kind of is the main researcher that really uncovered the intricacies of the vagus nerve. So his theory, which isn't just a theory, it's called the polyvagal theory. But the vagus nerve comes out of your brain, around the brainstem. It's a cranial nerve. And so there's your brainstem. And there's a front portion and a back portion. So one would be called the ventral, front, and dorsal. Now, the ventral portion innervates our face. So it allows us to make funny faces at each other and laugh or be sad. And it goes into our inner ear. It goes into our pharynx and our larynx for voice box production. And it goes to everything above the diaphragm. So it innervates the heart, the lungs, all that good stuff. It's very mammalian. We would call it the more evolved part of the vagus. The dorsal branch that goes the back of the brainstem, it kind of sneaks down and it innervates everything under the diaphragm. So the gut, all the organs, bladder, reproduction. Does not mean that there aren't other organ or other nerves that go to the visceral areas, but it's one of the main ones. When we're born, and this actually ties in really nicely with the ACE study, so it's a good thing you mentioned it. When we're born, the main part of the vagus nerve that's working is the dorsal portion, the portion that goes to the gut, all the viscera. The ventral portion, it's there waiting to be sparked up. And it sparks up by mom and caregiver, baby and caregiver, usually mom, connecting. This is what attachment is. This is what being attuned is, and making faces and cooing and cawing and that kind of interaction you have with the newborn is literally wiring up its ventral vagus nervous system. So that portion. The other thing, sidebar, the vagus nerve, these two branches, that's the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the autonomic nervous portion of the autonomic nervous system. And so when we're born, we need to have that engagement And what that does is it actually teaches the little one how to soothe. Because if you can remember that facial ventral also goes to the heart. So what it's doing when we talk about we need to learn how to self-soothe and self-regulate, that's where it's happening. It's happening with that. Some people call it the smart vagus, the ventral one, because it's what we connect. That's how after, say, an event, it's always nice to have another person there, because that connection brings our heart rate down. So then the interesting thing is that the dorsal branch that goes to the gut, the one that's below the diaphragm, it also can slow the heart rate down. So when we talk about shutdown and shock and going into like that shutdown state, fight, flight, freeze, shutdown, that portion of the vagus nerve, the back portion, it works real fast. So I think Porges calls it the dumb vagus. It's not really dumb. It's just kind of clumsy. It just shuts off. So that's what happens when someone, say, faints. They see blood, it's too overwhelming, they go out. Whereas if you can calm the heart rate, self-regulate the heart rate via the ventral portion of the vagus, the way humans are meant to interact with the calm, the heart rate comes down in a much more refined, kind of slow, easy way, and so it isn't a shock. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So what if I bridge it back to kind of wrap that up, when kids are born, they don't have that nice attachment. They don't learn how to self-soothe. Often it's because, poor mom didn't learn when she was little, so that's how she knows how to relate. That little one isn't learning the good connection, the good attachment to self-soothe their heart rate. And this is one thing that creates a lot of chronic anxiety, is that little one never gets the proper wiring of that ventral vagus. It kind of, one of my teachers would say, the wires are kind of hanging and they never fully got connected. And then again, that connects with that chronic illness piece.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of in a nutshell. The vagus is very complex, and it really is one of the things that's getting a lot of press right now because it shows such promise. It's one of the reasons why yoga, for example, when done well and safely with breathing and attention and sounds, like the ohms and the ahs and the voos, chanting, it stimulates that vagus to self-soothe the system. Yeah. How was that?
Yeah.
Very good.
That's cool.
So I actually want to ask you now a little bit of the opposite of this soothing, is you have some really interesting ideas on anger in your work and how we can actually empower or find the power in anger. So will you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, anger is a basic emotion. All mammals have it. This is sadness and grief and disgust and joy and all that. As a kind of generalization in our kind of North American, Euro, Australian, Anglo-Saxon life, way of keeping everything composed and, don't let your lid blow off. We've kind of, as a culture, learned to really repress this very important emotion of anger. What happens when we do that is that we're also repressing the physiology. So anger isn't really, and Gabor, we talked about Gabor Mate at the beginning. He does some beautiful writing around this topic in one of his books. But anger as an emotion isn't violent. It isn't rage. It isn't the fight. It's not an action. It's an energy. It's a welling of energy. Even Peter Levine has called this it's our life force energy to protect, to stay safe, to have boundaries. And so we want to learn again for those that have, squashed this important emotion down, to feel the anger and feel the energy of it, the physical, physiological heat that would come from anger. I mentioned the near miss car accident. So let's just say some jerk, cuts you off, and you will feel this heat. Like, I've had it happen. There's like a wave, right? That is the anger. And I know in our cultures, there's like road rage, right? Road rage is what happens when the anger isn't properly processed. That's the violence. That's the attacking. So what's happened is we've just stopped feeling these sensations because we've kind of disconnected from them. And so what we've again seen is when we repress this very important energy, it literally puts the system into shutdown. It kind of depresses it. And again, with my learnings with Peter Levine, et cetera, there's a big connection with depression and the repression of anger. And working with it is not simple, because usually I work with adults, big people, I call them. When we were little, usually two things happen. One, there's no anger in the household, but there's also no joy, no sadness. Things are just kind of emotionally numb, which is so common in North America. And then the flip side is where anger is violent, and it's rage, and it's abuse, verbal, physical, whatever. And so a person will grow up either fearing it because it was really bad, or they don't even know it exists. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens, I've seen when I work with my adult clients, is that because it's like a foreign language, or it was unsafe. And so to get someone to say, yeah, just feel that, it's like, no.
Yeah.
If I do this, I will risk my life. If I show my color, my energy, my spunk, which is that life force energy, I'm going to get slapped down, right? And so it's not a cognitive thing for us just to say to our clients or ourselves, okay, feel that anger, and express it. It has to be safe enough to do so, and to get to that point of feeling safe enough to express and to feel anger takes some time, when it's been kind of, I call it, bleached out of us, right? And it can be very also, to be very honest, a person can feel a lot of shame and a lot of guilt when they start to feel this life force energy, because it's just been so foreign, and anytime they've tried to show it, they've gotten punished or hurt. That's sad.
Yeah.
Right? So it's really, again, it goes back to that education piece. It's like, we're humans, we're animals. I always say to women, really relate to this. If you had if you were a mama bear and you had cubs, and if someone tried to take those cubs, and usually a woman and a man too, they'd be like, oh yeah, I would be protect my offspring. And if we can sometimes start with that dialogue, it can help people understand that this is an okay thing to feel. And in our human culture, that we want to feel it so that we don't end up hurting people.
Yeah, and hurting ourselves too, because actually I'd love to read that quote by Gabor.
Yeah.
Because I think it obviously it's relevant and fascinating. People diagnosed with cancer or autoimmune disease, with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, or with potentially debilitating neurological conditions are often enjoined to relax. Just relax, to think positively, to lower their stress levels. And all of that is good. Lost my place, sorry. But impossible to carry out if one of the major sources is not clearly identified and dealt with: the internalization of anger.
Yes.
So
yeah. And that's exactly it, is that we almost don't even know that that's what is causing our systems to be so high strung.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of I hate the term anxiety, even though we use it. It really is just intense sensation. Body sensation is anxiety that's built up in the system. But we just don't understand that a lot of that built up stress is the stored anger that has just never been put out. And so, to say to someone, just breathe, when actually what they need to do is growl, right? Or feel the power in their fists. And this, I'm going to say something that might be controversial, but this is what has to be done. Imagining strangling that person that hurt you. And in the work that I've learned with Peter and my colleagues, a lot of the time when there's been someone that we're working with who has had significant abuse, which is just part of life, you have to help them mobilize their fight energy that got shut down. Mm-hmm. This is especially true with any human, woman or man, that has been sexually abused or physically attacked. Usually when that happens, you go into a shutdown to preserve your safety, but under that preservation is this massive desire to fight and kill and annihilate. And so we need to recognize that as human animals, that physiological stored up energy is there. And then what happens with these people that are going to more calming practices is they'll often leave because they just can't handle it, because they're feeling too much intensity, or they think something's wrong with them because everyone else is all zenned out, and how come I just want to kill someone, and then they think they feel shame because I shouldn't be feeling this. Everyone's telling me to be all love and light, and I just want to punch someone. And I because there was a point where you wanted to punch someone, and that's totally valid. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the conversation that I'm grateful for Peter bringing up in our more master class sessions, is that we're these human beings that are very intelligent and very connected and very loving, but we're also mammals that need to protect our physiology. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting one that I think is really exciting to talk about. Mm-hmm. Because if we can move that energy and appreciate anger for what it is, and teach people how to present it in a way that's healthy, we will have less violence. Mm-hmm. We'll have less abuse, right? Most abuse that occurs in family relationships, it's not because kids were being bad, or it's because there's stored up energy that never got released because the parent was treated unwell. This is how we perpetuate abuse in family circles. Hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it does. And go back to the quote, like the internalization of it. I mean, it's so damaging. And, chronic illness is on the rise. And we've had on this summit so many amazing perspectives on how to look at that. But, if I could just share personally, and I'm sure Michael would have a lot to say about this topic too. But, like you said earlier, those of us that are facilitators of working with others, we really have to work through our own stuff first. And years ago, I did that in a coach's personal transformation program. 2 years it took me to even admit that I had anger. I was like, no, I had no access to it whatsoever. And no idea the cost it was having on me physically, my levels of pain. And I think, part of it, subconsciously, I knew I had anger, right? Yeah. I think the big thing was the fear of getting stuck in that anger. So I want to speak a little bit about that, because I'm imagining I'm not the only one that had that fear, right? Like if I start to let it out, I'm going to get stuck in it.
Yeah. Get stuck in it, or it's going to be so big that I'm going to hurt someone. Yeah. Or I'm going to hurt myself. Mm-hmm. And this is where, again, education, let's go back to that, super important. And building what I call capacity in the person's physiology, in their nervous system, and they're knowing that they can have energy, big energy that comes out, and then it can come back down. And one of the terms that Peter Levine kind of coined, he took from organic chemistry, is called titration. And so what often happens in past, like back in the day, like the Freudian, Jungian world of psychology, and then Reichian work, is these big cathartic ways of working with anger and your stored up rage, where you take a baseball bat and you hit things and you go crazy. And the trouble with that we're seeing is that you're taking someone who has no skill, or we assume has very little skill, to feel and sense and stay contained and stay in the present moment. And you're just asking them to just rip apart this emotion that they've never touched into a little bit. And what happens is a person will feel better after these kind of big cathartic things that happen still today in a lot of programs that I hear about. Sadly, they'll feel good because of all the endorphins that are being released. It's like a good run, going on a good run. But then a week later or a day later, all the tension is back. All of the, emotional strain is back. And it's because there wasn't a connection to that internal energy of it rising. And so what I've seen is, if you can work with someone, or if someone can work in a way that they're learning the layers of feeling, of emotion, of sensing their breath, of sensing their heart, of feeling the anxiety, the little bits of snarls, like what is it like to just snarl a little bit as opposed to like let it all out. And that in itself for some people is huge. Like some of my clients, we will only work on thinking about snarling for a year because it's just so unsafe to go down that rabbit hole. Whereas sometimes that person will have been at a retreat where they have gotten a baseball bat and beaten something, but they kind of disconnected from it. So for those that are worried about getting stuck, if the practitioner, if the person you're working with has done the groundwork and has taught the person how to feel first, how to know how to get out and reorient, how to stay contained, how to reach out and connect, then we really don't risk getting stuck. But there's just been this massive gap, I've seen at least in the self-development, the healing worlds, of not taking the time to lay the foundations. It's like you couldn't go to Italy and learn and just start talking Italian if you've never learned the basics. And we're asking a lot of people to dive into deep emotion as if we think that they know how to self-regulate, how to self-soothe. That you see the parallel there?
Yeah.
Like, and I think we've gotten into this system where we want a quick fix. Even though people say they want to do the work, they really don't want to do the work. And I love my clients, right? Because they take their time, and I'm like, this isn't going to be something that we finish in 2 months. Right? Some of my clients have been with me for 3 years. It doesn't mean I see them every day or every week, but there's this knowing that there's this constant apprenticeship, like you would learn a language, right? Someone that learned Italian at the beginning will have no trouble. It's always been wired in. But if you didn't have that early learning of how to be in your body as a child, being okay expressing anger, seeing mom and dad have a fight, but then not a fight, but like a heated argument, but then recover, we don't know that exists. And so you have to kind of pretend that this person has never spoken the language of heated emotion.
Well, let me just ask you a follow-up to this. Like, let's say somebody listening because and we've expressed this on the summit before, the importance of working with somebody. Well, let's say that's not accessible to them. What would be an entry point that you would recommend for somebody that maybe can't hire you to work with?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, I don't have I have a private practice, but I'm not really promoting it anymore because I've developed a lot of online stuff that, and I know we'll give people a little bit of a gift after this, but what I've created in my kind of work world online are different online programs that I've literally curated everything I've learned in the Feldenkrais world and in Peter's world and Kathy Kane's world into kind of a magnum opus, if you will, a journey of learning the education, the small little exercises, laying the foundation, learning how to be in the body, learning how to connect at the different levels, kind of like I would if I was to work with someone one-on-one. But I've realized that the demand for what we have going on right now with people waking up to, I need to work on this, there's just not enough practitioners that have the level of training to work at this level. So that's kind of what I've created in my online program, is this very titrated, layered approach to building more capacity in the nervous system, more body awareness, more self-awareness, working at the stress chemistry, like Gabor's quote there, learning how to feel the internal energy, the internal physiology, so that a person can be like, oh, this is what I'm noticing right now. And here's a tool that I can use to kind of reconnect and move some of this out. So it isn't, the other thing too is, depending on the person's history, one person might need something that's a little more movement oriented, more energy producing, and some people need to just sit and feel their wrist and connect with that. Like that's as much as they could do. Right. And it's because us humans were so diverse, right? Our upbringings are so different. We're not like a big herd of cattle that have been raised exactly the same way and have the exact same daily routine. And because of that, I find it's really hard to just say, this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
And again, not to sound like a broken record, but it goes back to the education.
Yeah.
It really seems to make a difference when people get that base, because then they become curious to then ask the question, okay, maybe I'm feeling this energy. The thought right now of sitting still makes me want to like crawl out of my skin. I think I need to go outside and go for a walk. So if I can teach someone to have even that level of discernment, I've done my job.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be that simple, right? Just going out, being outdoors to changing the environment.
Oh yeah, we so need it. We need to be not just outdoors, but moving. Like our movement practices have become so rigid, and many of us don't have the luxury of being in the woods. So it's like, what can we teach people so that they can be in their bodies? Yoga is very good. Feldenkrais, dance, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So what is there anything we haven't talked about yet? Should we touch on self-sabotage a little more? I know we talked about it a little bit. But maybe
the anger thing ties into that, because what often, again, this isn't always the case, but a trend that often happens is if we go again back to, it all comes back to the childhood, right? If that little person wasn't allowed to express their anger, they had this energy and they had to like internalize it, there's this tendency to kind of redirect the bad stuff back to them. So I'm feeling this and I can't cope with it, therefore I must be XYZ, like whatever, fill in the word. whatever it is. There's so many words that we use to cause ourselves self-harm, especially with the psyche. In terms of self-sabotage, again, it comes back to that energy. Like if we were taught not to feel these big emotions and express, and we're wanting to, like, I've got to write that book or sing that song or create that business or go tell that person we love them or whatever. And the energy, the sensation with it is just so big and we're not used to feeling it, we'll sabotage ourselves because that capacity hasn't been built in the system to handle this immensity of, say, a big project or reaching out to that person that you really were smitten with or whatever it is. And then we just it's literally like this self-inflicted shutdown, right? There's fight, flight, freeze. It's like this way of just, I sometimes speak in body movements. It's like this enveloping in, and it's very much an introverted quality to just kind of shut it down, to sabotage. And there's lots of different ways of looking at it, but from what I've seen, it comes back to how well can a human being feel and process all of their human experience, the feeling, the emotion, the sensation, the thoughts, the behaviors, and be able to integrate and make sense of what's coming up. That's like, when we can do that, we're doing pretty good. And depending on where along our trajectory of life we got shut down, we got into an accident, we had a mishap, we're going to have this disjointed picture of how to feel those things and sense those things. And so for many, it's about pulling apart and feeling, okay, this is a sensation. This is a thought. This is a desire to move my body in a certain way, and this is okay. Right? And when I move my body this way, I feel some joy, right? And if someone has been told, don't do that, the moment it starts to come out spontaneously, if they're not careful, that script will play of stop that. And often when I ask my clients, I'm like, where's that coming from? And they're like, it's just there. Because it's always been there. And so it's that capacity, and this is where Dr. Feldenkrais's work was really important, is this capacity to notice an action or notice a thought and pause and then redirect it. So a big part of his movement practice, which a lot of people don't realize, they think it's just for pain and that kind of thing, but the actual practice of Feldenkrais is going into a movement pattern and being able to pause the thought before you act. So I might say, roll your pelvis to the left. And most of us would just automatically go into that movement. But it's like, no, before you do that, can you teach yourself to feel what that might be like, to sense how the movement might happen? Notice how you might hold your breath, clench your fists, and then do the movement, and notice all these parts of human experience. So it's like this pausing. So that's kind of that would be my way of talking about self-sabotage. It's so diverse and individual, but it really comes down again to being able to have that self-awareness of, when do I do that? Right? When do I shut myself down? Right. When someone reaches out to me, do I stop that connection? Right? And again, it can often go back to that early attachment. Like when I was a little baby, I always reached out for mom and she just wasn't there. Right? And so the pattern is, if I reach out, no one is there. So then you stop reaching out.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's all very fascinating.
Very light. It's very light information.
Yes.
So I know for sure the participants are going to want to learn more about you. Where do they find you?
Just my name is my site. So IRENE Lyon, Lyon with a Y, like the town in France. And when you go there, that's snoop around. I've got all the classic things of a website. More of my history, got a blog. I'm doing way more video in YouTube. So there's a YouTube channel that's got lots of videos that are apparently binge worthy.
Okay. Excellent. We'll make sure that it's easy for them. I'll provide the links on the YouTube video and things like that so that everyone can find you.
Yeah.
Before we close, do you have any final words of closing for us?
I think education, right? Like when I do these interviews, I always, and I know, people can get the free gift that we're giving them and practice that. It's more of a ebook. It's called 7 Steps to De-Stress. Again, it's education and then just some basic how to pause, how to stop, how to feel, like very basic. If you do go to my site, I have a SoundCloud audio that actually guides, I forgot to tell you that, guides people through the 7 steps.
Oh,
so
that's cool.
But yeah, education. Like, I find that if there can be a mass education, if someone can really dive in and learn about their nervous system like it is a language, because it is, to me, it's like the one thing that connects all animals. Because every single animal on this planet has fight, flight to some degree, except for the fish, like down in the ocean, right? They're living in freeze. But we've got this common language, and I've seen when we understand these fight, flight, shut down, how we store anger, we see people in a different way. We're like, oh, that person's being pissy because they're trapped in their survival response. And if I just say hi and smile and don't push, I might get a better reaction. Or, oh, that person doesn't want to be talked to, then I'm going to leave them, right? So there's this interesting thing when we get that education on board. Everybody, I find, again, I've been told, people just become a little more human. That's been my experience, which I think we need a lot more of. So,
well, thank you so much, Irene. This has been really informative and educational and fascinating information.
It is.
It is.
It really is. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you.
For participants, I encourage you to keep watching. We've got several more days left in the summit, and you're getting a lot of tools for your toolbox to help you de-stress. So come on back. We look forward to seeing you back next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks again, Irene. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.